To the ancient Egyptians, death was not the end of life. It was the moment when life truly began. They believed the body was not a shell, it was an anchor. Without it, the soul would drift forever, lost between worlds. And so the dead had to be preserved, not for memory, not for respect, but out of terror. Because if the body decayed, the soul would die a second death. And this fear created one of the most disturbing rituals in human history. Mummification was not a peaceful ceremony. It was a violent transformation of a human corpse into a sacred object, a process that lasted 70 days. 70 days of cutting, drying, draining, and rebuilding the body for eternity. The first step was purification. The corpse was washed in water from the Nile, the river of life and death. Then the real work began. Priests broke the nose of the dead and inserted long metal hooks into the skull. They stirred the brain until it turned liquid and slowly pulled it out piece by piece. No anesthesia, no care, only efficiency. The brain was discarded. It was considered useless. Thought did not matter in the afterlife. Memory did not matter. Only the heart. Then the body was cut open with an obsidian blade, a sacred knife used only for the dead. Liver, lungs, stomach, intestines, all removed. The cavity was washed with palm wine and filled with spices, resin, and linen. The organs were placed into canopic jars, guarded by animal gods, not to protect the body, but to protect the soul from losing its identity. Because a fragmented body meant a fragmented existence. But the most terrifying part was not what was removed. It was what remained. The heart stayed inside, because the heart would be weighed by the gods. If it was heavy with sin, it would be devoured by a creature called Amit, part lion, part crocodile, part hippo. Not hell, not punishment, annihilation. To the Egyptians, this was the worst fate imaginable, to cease completely, to become nothing. And so every cut, every ritual, every spell was designed to prevent this outcome. After the organs were removed, the body was covered in natron salt for 40 days. The flesh shrank, the skin darkened, the body collapsed inward. The human form became something unnatural, a dry shell. Then came reconstruction. The corpse was stuffed with linen, the face reshaped with resin, eyes replaced with stones or glass. The dead were not preserved as they were. They were rebuilt into an ideal version of themselves, an eternal mask. The final stage was wrapping. Hundreds of meters of linen, each layer coated in resin, each fold accompanied by spoken spells. Priests whispered instructions to the soul, how to breathe, how to walk, how to remember its name, because forgetting meant death. Amulets were placed between the layers, scarab beetles for rebirth, eyes for protection, symbols of life stitched directly into the body. But mummification was not available to everyone. The poor were often simply dried in the desert sand. No spells, no jars, no protection. Their souls were believed to wander, unstable, hungry, dangerous. Ghosts were not fiction in Egypt. They were expected consequences of failed rituals. Some medical papyri describe illnesses as attacks from restless dead. Treatment involved not medicine, but exorcism, and sometimes violence. But even successful mummification did not guarantee peace. Tombs were filled with traps, curses, and threats carved into stone. Death will come on swift wings to anyone who disturbs this grave. Not symbolic, a real warning. Because the dead could see, and they could punish. But even the most perfect mummification did not guarantee safety, because the body was only one part of the soul. The Egyptians believed a human consisted of several elements: the ka, life force; the ba, personality; the ak, the transformed spirit; and the ren, the name. If even one of these was lost, the afterlife could collapse. That is why tombs were not just graves. They were machines for immortality. Walls covered with instructions, paintings showing the soul what to do, spells written to be read by the dead themselves. Some tombs included full maps of the underworld, gate numbers, names of demons, words to speak to avoid being attacked. The afterlife was not peaceful. It was a hostile territory. A labyrinth of monsters, fire lakes, decapitated spirits, and divine executioners. And the mummy was expected to navigate it, blind, alone. That is why elites paid enormous fortunes for better preservation. Royal mummification was extreme. The skin was soaked in resins so thick the body turned black. The face was covered in gold masks to prevent identity loss. Fingernails were replaced with artificial ones. Hair was restored. Perfumes were injected into the chest cavity. The dead were turned into objects of worship, not remembered as humans, but as divine artifacts. And yet, even pharaohs feared decay. Some kings ordered multiple backup mummies. Others hid fake tombs, false coffins, empty chambers. They believed destruction of the body was worse than assassination, because a murdered king could still exist. A decomposed king could not. But the terror did not stop with humans. Egypt turned mummification into an industry of death. Animals were slaughtered by the millions. Cats, dogs, birds, crocodiles, snakes, bulls. Not as pets, as offerings. Entire underground catacombs were filled with animal corpses, stacked like bricks, wrapped in linen, sealed in darkness. Some animals were raised only to die. They never saw sunlight. They existed only to become sacred objects. The god Apis was worshipped in the form of a living bull. When it died, the entire country mourned. Then another bull was selected, and the cycle repeated. Divinity was temporary. Death was eternal. Even criminals were sometimes mummified. Not out of respect, but to prevent them from becoming vengeful ghosts. The belief was simple. An unpreserved body creates a dangerous spirit. So even enemies were wrapped. Better imprisoned in linen than roaming in death. But perhaps the darkest reality is this. Mummification created obsession. People became terrified of natural death. They feared accidents, burning, drowning, animal attacks. Any death that damaged the body was considered catastrophic, because a destroyed corpse meant a destroyed eternity. Some people even avoided certain professions: soldiers, sailors, hunters, not because of risk, but because of decomposition. To die without a body was worse than dying painfully. This fear created a culture where death dominated life. Children learned funerary spells. Homes stored burial shrouds in advance. People prepared their own coffins decades before dying. Life became a waiting room, a preparation for a single moment. And the moment was terrifying, because even after all rituals, all magic, all gold and prayers, nothing was guaranteed. Mummies decayed, tombs collapsed, floods destroyed graves, grave robbers burned bodies for jewelry. And the greatest horror of all was this: most Egyptians failed. They were not preserved, they were not protected, they were forgotten. Their bodies returned to dust, their names disappeared. Their souls, according to their own beliefs, simply stopped existing. The civilization that obsessed over immortality created a world where almost no one achieved it. Mummification was not about defeating death. It was about delaying disappearance, a desperate attempt to hold identity against time. And in the end, the terrifying truth of Egyptian mummification is simple. It was not a ritual of hope. It was a ritual of fear. Fear of rot, fear of memory loss, fear of being erased from the universe. The wrapped bodies were not sleeping. They were imprisoned, locked in eternal stillness, waiting for gods that might never come. Preserved not to live forever, but because the Egyptians were too afraid to let themselves truly die.